The beginning of a frozen nightmare. What happens when a city of 3 million people is cut off from the world, with no food, no heat, and no hope of rescue? In the summer of 1941, Europe was already ablaze. Nazi Germany had conquered much of the continent. France had fallen. Britain was reeling. But Hitler had his eyes on a far greater prize, the vast lands of the Soviet Union. In June 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history. One of the most symbolic targets was Leningrad, once the imperial capital of Russia, renamed after Vladimir Lenin, and now the cultural and industrial heart of the Soviet Union. A city of poets and painters, of opera houses and shipyards, of revolutionaries and dreamers. But for Adolf Hitler, Leningrad was more than just a city. It was, in his eyes, the soul of Bolshevism, a living monument to everything he hated. His aim was not to capture it, but to erase it. His orders were clear. Let the city starve. No surrender, no supplies, no survivors. And so it began. In September 1941, Nazi forces completed their encirclement of Leningrad. All roads in and out were cut, railways destroyed, supply lines severed. What followed was not a traditional siege, but a slow-motion genocide. What would come to be known as the Siege of Leningrad lasted not weeks, not months, but 872 days. Nearly 2.5 years of unimaginable suffering. Families freezing to death in their own homes, children wasting away, people boiling wallpaper glue just to have something to eat. This was not war. This was the weaponization of hunger, and yet, somehow, the city endured. But imagine being there, trapped in -30 degrees Celsius, bombs falling, no electricity, and nothing to eat but sawdust bread. Could you survive in a place where children ate glue to stay alive? The city that refused to die. Leningrad was never just another Soviet city. Before the war, it was a symbol of intellectual power, cultural brilliance, and industrial might. A place where poets and painters shared cafes with factory workers and orchestras played to packed concert halls. Libraries, theaters, museums. This was a city that breathed art, thought, and revolution. But when the siege began, Leningrad changed overnight. The first characters in our story were its people. Women, children, the elderly suddenly turned into frontline survivors. Fathers went to war. Mothers queued for hours in the snow, hoping for a few grams of bread. Children became adults far too soon. Among them was Tanya Savicheva, a little girl with a pencil and a notebook. Her diary didn't have long poetic entries, just dates, names, and death. Each page recorded the loss of a loved one. Her family died one by one, until she was the last name left. That diary would later become a global symbol of suffering in wartime. Then there were the soldiers, the Red Army units assigned to defend the city. Armed with aging rifles and minimal supplies, they stood between Leningrad and annihilation. They dug trenches in frozen ground, built barricades from rubble. And they fought, not just to repel the enemy, but to protect their own homes. Above them, the Soviet leadership, figures like Andrei Zhdanov, head of the city's defense committee. Operating under Stalin's shadow, Zhdanov helped orchestrate a massive civilian mobilization. Entire industries were relocated underground. Schools turned into arms factories. Even teenagers joined work brigades. But nothing could stop what was coming. The railway lines were cut. Gas and electricity went dead. Communications collapsed. By October 1941, Leningrad was sealed off from the world. No reinforcements, no food convoys, no safe passage. The city that once hummed with life now echoed with silence. The winter of starvation. By the end of November 1941, Leningrad had frozen over, literally. The temperature dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius. The rivers became sheets of ice. The streets, once filled with life, were now choked with snow and silence. There was no heat, no electricity, and barely any light. Just the soft flicker of candles, if you were lucky enough to have one. The government issued ration cards, but the numbers were cruel. 125 grams of bread per person per day. But this wasn't bread as we know it. It was made from sawdust, moldy flour, and floor sweepings, a black, bitter brick that turned to ash in the mouth. When even that was gone, people ate what they could find. Wallpaper paste was boiled into soup, leather belts and shoes were softened and chewed. Rats became a delicacy. Dogs disappeared from the streets. Then, so did some people. There are reports, once denied, later declassified by the NKVD, of cannibalism, not out of evil, out of desperation. In Leningrad, death became part of the landscape. People collapsed while fetching water from frozen lakes. Their bodies froze in place, still clutching buckets. Corpses lay on stairwells for days. There was simply no strength left to bury them. Funerals stopped. Silence reigned. In the middle of all this, a young girl named Tanya Savicheva continued writing in her diary. One page reads, "Zhenya died on December 28, 1941. Grandma died on January 25, 1942. Uncle Lesha died on May 10, 1942. She wasn't writing to remember. She was writing to bear witness. One by one, her entire family perished from starvation, cold, and disease. When Tanya was finally evacuated months later, she herself was dying. She never lived to see peace. Her diary now rests in the Museum of Leningrad, a small notebook, faded ink, and 9 lines. Defiance in the face of death. Leningrad must not fall, not under any circumstances. That was Stalin's order, not a suggestion, but a command, carved in ice and blood. The Soviet government made its position clear. If the city died, so would the soul of the Soviet Union. And so, the people of Leningrad transformed. They became workers by day, soldiers by night, and patriots always. Even as German artillery rained fire, factories kept running. Women operated lathes while bombs exploded outside. Children helped melt snow for industrial boilers. The wounded carried ammunition. It wasn't just survival, it was resistance. And then came a moment that would become legend. In the summer of 1942, while the city still starved and the enemy still bombarded them, the Leningrad Radio Orchestra gathered in a half-ruined concert hall. Many musicians were dead, others were pulled from the front lines or brought back from hospitals. Together, they performed Shostakovich's Symphony No. 7, the Leningrad Symphony. The music echoed across the city. It was broadcast through loudspeakers. Even German troops heard it from their trenches. This wasn't just a concert. It was a statement. We are still alive. Meanwhile, the government organized a vast network of bomb shelters, anti-aircraft batteries, and even underground schools. Civilians trained with rifles patrolled the streets and built barricades. The entire city became a fortress. But with railroads destroyed and the city sealed, how did supplies get in? Enter the most dangerous supply route of World War II, the Road of Life. In winter, Lake Ladoga froze, turning into a vast sheet of ice. Soviet engineers mapped safe routes, and trucks began driving across the frozen lake, carrying food and evacuating children under constant fire from German bombers. The ice was thin. It cracked often. Trucks sometimes sank with their drivers still inside. Breaking the chains, but at what cost? By January 1943, after more than 16 months of agony, the Soviet command launched a desperate counter-offensive. It was called Operation Iskra, Spark. The goal, to pierce the German lines and carve open a narrow land corridor into the city, and against all odds, they succeeded. Soviet troops broke through from the south of Lake Ladoga, opening a slender 10-kilometer path. It was just enough to lay new rails and send the first trains into Leningrad, bringing food, fuel, and the first faint glimmers of hope. But make no mistake, the siege was not over. For nearly another year, the Germans continued to bombard the city. The suffering continued. The starvation didn't stop. Winter came again, and then again. By the third winter, the population had shrunk dramatically. Most had died, been evacuated, or simply disappeared. The official toll, over 1.1 million civilian deaths, most from hunger, cold, and bombing. When the full siege was finally lifted in January 1944, Soviet forces pushed the German army away from the city's gates. But what they found inside was not a city. It was a shell. Buildings were burned out husks, streets littered with bones, apartments reduced to icy tombs. Entire families had died in silence, their names never recorded. The survivors were barely alive. Their bodies were emaciated, their eyes hollow, but they had endured, through hunger, through cold, through grief, through 872 days of hell. And yet, Leningrad had not surrendered. The Nazis had tried to wipe it from the map, but the people of Leningrad, those who remained, had turned their will to survive into a weapon of resistance. The city was in ruins, but its spirit was unbroken. So what gave them the strength? What allows a human being to survive when everything and everyone is gone? Legacy, lessons, and the unanswered question. The Siege of Leningrad was the longest and deadliest siege in modern human history. 872 days, over 1 million civilians dead, countless more scarred for life. Yet, from the ashes of that frozen hell emerged something extraordinary, a legacy of resilience, of courage in silence, and of a city that refused to die, even when the world had given it up for dead. To this day, in concert halls across Europe, you can still hear the haunting echoes of Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony, the Leningrad. It is not just music. It is memory set to sound, a city screaming into the void, refusing to be forgotten. In modern Russia, statues and museums now honor the ordinary people of Leningrad. Not generals, not politicians, but mothers, children, teachers, and laborers, those who endured hunger, terror, and loss with a quiet dignity that defies description. For the first time in history, it wasn't just the warriors who were venerated, it was the survivors. Because the Siege of Leningrad wasn't just a military event. It was a human one, a reminder that war doesn't only kill with bullets, it kills with hunger, with cold, with isolation, and with indifference. But above all, the siege teaches us this: there is something inside the human spirit that refuses to be extinguished, even when all hope is gone. And so we ask, if it happened again, could another city, another generation, survive something like this? Would we be as strong? Would we hold the line? Would we remember how? But then again, is this truly the whole story?